Good morning and welcome to the NBA Daily. Coming up, the Cavs become the first team to clinch a playoff spot. Payton Pritchard did what? And we got Fred Katz on to talk about his big feature on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the Thunder's chance at a title. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, S.
Good
The Cleveland
morning.
Cavaliers, man.
Ooh.
We are running out of ways to call them good. They won their 12th straight game. That's their third winning streak of the season of at least 12 games, which is pretty insane. They now have 52 wins. And on March 5th, they clinched a playoff berth.
Yeah.
That's absurd, S.
It's absolutely absurd. The fact that they are like head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. It's just awesome to see from a team that's like really versatile. I wanted to mention something about DeAndre Hunter because in this game against Miami, by the way, Miami pushed them. Like Bam had a really good game against them. I thought in general, they just played a good defensive game overall against the Cavs. But then they went to their lineup. The Cavs did with DeAndre Hunter at the 4 and Evan Mobley at the 5. And so this is what you expected when they traded for Hunter in the first place, a guy who can space the floor a little bit. Obviously, he's shooting like 58% from 3 in his little stint with Cleveland so far. Not sustainable, but something that will be really prevalent in what he can bring to this Cavs team. And then another guy who can bring size, another guy who can just be able to make some plays across the floor. He was in that short roll area to start.
I was going to say. Another guy who can run screens, right? Like he can come set screens for the guards
that lob
up there.
To Mobley in the fourth too. Overall, man, like I think he fits like a glove. And when you have a guy who can add that little bit of versatility to that lineup, it changes things for me. I think
he's the piece that they've been missing in the perfect position because they've needed a guy. You know, they had Karis LeVert, who, in my opinion, is more of a 2 that slid up to play 3 a lot for them. They were constantly like undersized at the 3, and now they've got the guy who can give them that.
He's a 3 who can be a 4. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That versatility that they need because it'll allow them to split the bigs up. And now, like honestly, their big man rotation could just be Hunter, Mobley, and Allen when you get to the playoffs. You know, because you only really need to spell those guys for a few minutes here and there and to mix things up. But I did think some of the stuff they were doing, using him in as a screener, you know.
Look, you just have to be able to have solutions in the playoffs, right? Yeah. Just other options that you can go to. And if the double big lineup doesn't work, you can go to one big, and Hunter just makes that all the more easier, right? So he's been great for them.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Celtics because Payton Pritchard
incredible.
Scored 43 points off the bench. He hit 10 threes, and also Derek White hit 9 threes and had 41 points as the Celtics beat the Blazers. Jason Tatum didn't play, and look, we're going to put a pin in that for later on when we have some anti-Jason Tatum agenda that we need to work out. But ridiculous game from Payton Pritchard. This guy, he's good enough to start for so many teams. And if you put them on a bad team, they instantly would become more watchable and more fun. But he had a crazy game. There was just no answer to be found for the Blazers for the three-point shooting yesterday.
After watching the Orlando Magic for the last week, they could use Payton Pritchard.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, he's been an absurd shooter all season. Legitimately one of the best shooters in the league this year. I think I saw a stat a couple of weeks ago. He generates 1.7 points per possession off of screens. Just elite stuff, like ridiculous stuff from a guy who just has to sit there and shoot, right? He's playing next to Tatum, playing next to Jaylen Brown. He can really just maximize his possessions, and he does. And so, look, he's one of those guys who is in the conversation for Sixth Man of the Year, rightfully so. And nights like these are going to put you in that conversation. Crazy that this is the first Celtics duo to get 40 points each. Just nuts. You know, all the legends.
It's
Derek White and Payton Pritchard.
I mean, well, Tatum and Brown, like you would think that maybe there would be a chance, but none whatsoever.
Not even Bird and McHale, like something.
Well, now that makes a little bit more sense. 40 is hard to get.
You're right.
Having two guys get it. I mean, there was a little bit of a need there too for the Celtics because they were a little shorthanded. Also, should shout out Jaylen Brown. He had 18, 8, and 8. I thought it was one of the better playmaking games that I've seen out of him. He's not exactly, the most ready passer when it comes to when he's on the drive, but I thought he did a pretty good job of actually stirring the drink for them. Look, the Celtics, we've called them bored, we've called them boring. This wasn't a boring game at all. Payton Pritchard, man, that was a pretty good time. Also not boring last night. We got to talk about the Nuggets because they picked up a pretty big win. The Kings have been playing really well here recently. They lost Sabonis. We got a chance to see this new starting lineup. So I do want to start with that with the Kings before we get to the Nuggets. But new starting lineup for the Kings. They had Keon Ellis, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Jonas Valanciunas. And their early returns were pretty great. I thought the 42 points in the first quarter, they really caught the Nuggets off guard. Jonas Valanciunas for a large portion of the game, 2.5 quarters, was outplaying Jokic. Until Jokic got pissed off, and then that was
just caught angry. I mean, look, Jokic had a right to be pissed. There was a lot of calls going back and forth. This was a very physical game. Yeah, on both sides, very physical game. Yeah. And it's
we're gonna find out there's a show in Denver that these guys had tickets to, that the referees had tickets to, or they all had early lift tickets to get out to Vail. They had some skiing to do because they just weren't calling fouls. Jokic getting hacked. But it was both ways. Like neither team was really getting any foul calls.
Yeah, maybe another day we talk about the review process for the NBA and how it could be sped up. That's a different conversation.
I will tell you, there is some referee analytics available, and interesting enough, Scott Foster is last in number of reviews that become overturned. So just that's a side note, little anecdote. Put a pin in that. Maybe we'll get to that at some point this season.
On the Kings. Yeah, we should talk about that at some point. On the Kings front, look, I think they found a way to be more successful defensively in this stretch. They lost this one, but in their last 10 games, they were a top 10 defense. I think a defensive playmaker like Keon Ellis, they've been finding ways to survive with Jonas Valanciunas on the court. They did so tonight for the most part with camping Russell Westbrook and kind of laying off of him. Russ made them pay in the second half, was just a monster, made shots, was able to cut around the basket next to Jokic. But they've been finding different ways to succeed. I'm interested because the Kings are climbing up the standings. And there's now an opportunity presented because the Mavs are hurt. The Clippers are kind of dwindling a little bit. There's sort of this moment here where the Kings might be able to grab like the 7th or the 8th seed, depending on how the rest of the season shakes out.
Yeah, let's swing it to Denver because, they've just been a little bit up and down here recently. That Lakers loss, it felt like shook them up a little bit. And teams are guarding Jokic differently. Since
they're kind of guarding them like the Lakers did.
Yeah, since the Lakers showed them, hey, if you just throw front and throw a ton of bodies at him, you can bother him. And in this game, I mean, again, Jokic getting hacked, getting pulled on, and finally just got annoyed and took over the game, largely just because I think he was pissed. So he takes over the game, but they don't have Aaron Gordon out there. You mentioned Russ. They weren't really guarding Russ for large portions of the game. But it was a big bench game for the Nuggets. They actually stormed back from a deficit thanks to the bench. Jokic was sitting on the bench when these guys came back. And Zeke Naji's kind of been a little bit of a revelation to them.
I'm glad you mentioned it. Zeke Naji, I am here to talk. Okay, so Zeke Naji against the Pistons a couple of weeks ago, or maybe about a week ago, he had a moment where I was like, oh man, he is stopping Cade Cunningham. Like he is making things very difficult for Cade. And then I watched a Pacers game, I think a couple days before that, Zeke Naji making a lot of defensive plays. This is interesting. He has gotten the most consistent run that he probably has had this entire season over the last 10 to 15 games. He's finally in the rotation for the Nuggets. And if you look at the box score, if you look at the plus minus, he's consistently winning his minutes. The defensive side of the ball, they have now got a guy off of the bench who can win minutes as a big man defensively. They've been throwing in DeAndre Jordan, right? Yeah. That's what they were kind of living with for the start of the season. now throwing in Zeke Naji, they have a guy who can guard multiple different positions. Even in this game, he had a moment where he guarded Levine, guarded DeRozan, guarded Valanciunas, 3 different possessions. So super impressed with him. I think he kind of creates a secondary bench group for them, with obviously Murray and Porter Jr. being a part of that. But you have Russ, you have Peyton Watson, maybe Julian Strawther can be a part of that. The Nuggets second unit is sort of figuring itself out. And I think a big part of that is Zeke Naji.
I just love that they've got a couple of guys who can defend. To be honest with you.
It really helps. Yeah.
And finally, hey, last night, shout out to Giannis. The Bucks get a win, and Giannis passes the 20,000 point mark. He is, what is this? He's the 6th fastest to 20,000 points. He is now 52nd on the all-time scoring list. Who's in the group around him, just for context?
For fun. Okay, so right ahead of him, Anton Jameson, Wizards legend. Anton Jameson. Yeah, Tar Heel. He's got a few more points than him, which is crazy. That's probably the craziest name I've seen on here. Tom Chambers, right? Joe Johnson.
Wow.
Right? Joe Johnson, Mitch Richmond, LaMarcus Aldridge, George Gervin, David Robinson. These are all the
guys that he's going to pass this season.
Yes, he will.
Yeah.
I think, like, if you look at it, he'll probably get to 40th or 42nd this season. It's just inevitable at this point. Not that many games left, but he can get 200 more points. That's
just turned 30,
20,000
points. Feels like 30,000 is a safe bet, which KD, just passed here recently. 30,000, probably a safe bet as long as he stays healthy. We're talking literally like one of the greatest players of all time.
Absolutely.
And we are living in a golden age of that. Actually, there are so many of the all-time greats of the sport that are playing right now. And, 10 years from now, I think we're going to look back on now as the best
beautiful time to like basketball, Dave.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's something good every single night. Guys, stick around. Speaking of something good, Fred Katz after the break. As we're rounding the corner and heading into the playoffs, it feels pretty apparent that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has the MVP locked up. Here to talk about how he forged his own path into that conversation and really to the award, Fred Katz. Got a big feature on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over at The Athletic. How's it going, buddy?
It's going great. It's going great.
Did you have a good trip to Canada?
Hamilton.
Great trip to Hamilton, Ontario. I hear it's very industrial.
Yes.
There is what I said.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like Pittsburgh. That's.
Have you ever been to Pittsburgh?
I've driven by Pittsburgh.
Beautiful city on the river. That also beautiful. Also, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Let's talk about Shai and his beautiful game. Fred, the first time I saw Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he was sharing the backcourt with Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the 2017 Hoop Summit, and that guy looked like a star to me. A flat out star. When did you know he was going to be a star?
I knew he was going to be really good his rookie year during that first round series the Clippers played against the Warriors.
Yeah.
If you remember that series, he started in that series and he was so composed throughout that entire series. And if you remember that series, that was the year before the Clippers got Paul George and Kawhi. So it's like post Blake Griffin, and the Clippers are this scrappy upstart team that wins 48 games, and everybody's surprised that they win 48 games and they kind of take the world by shock, right? And they end up playing a really competitive series against the Warriors. And this is the KD Warriors in the first round of the playoffs. I think they won 2 games in that series. And Shai was just making every right read. He was getting the ball on a catch and go. He was hitting the paint, and he was reading the low man, and he was kicking to the corner. He was making every proper read he was supposed to make. And I was like, you can't speed this guy up. And I think that's probably the moment when I realized, all right, this guy's pace is something a little different. You're not going to make him play at your pace, no matter the scenario. I think that's probably when I noticed he was going to be really good. That being said, I didn't sit there in that moment and say, this guy's going to be an MVP one day. I did not think that highly of him in that moment.
I don't think the Clippers
it's hard
thought
to win
that
MVP,
either. Yeah.
I don't think the Thunder thought that when they made that trade. I mean, I think the Thunder were really high on him. They thought he was going to be really good. They trusted their internal development, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think they made that trade being like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to be a perennial MVP candidate. And I will disagree with you, Dave, even though I wrote the story. I don't know if he's got MVP locked up.
Really?
I think
that was going to be a question. Do you think it's,
You think it's still up in the air with him and Jokic, or you think LeBron has like an outside shot like I do?
I can't tell you how the other voters are going to react, but in my mind, Jokic is firmly in the race. Firmly. And we'll see what happens over this next month and a half. But to me, it's one of those situations where I don't have a problem with either of the votes. They're two. There's some years where it's like bad candidates. Yeah, these are great candidates.
Yeah, historical season for Jokic. Often, like everything you look at, he's is somehow better than the other MVP seasons that he's had. So it's hard to not put him in the conversation here for MVP. It's just like, how are you not going to include a guy like that in the conversation? Wanted to ask you specifically about something in this piece, because you talked about switching gears and the pace that SGA plays with. And you had this quote from his high school basketball coach, his club coach, where he's like, I'm a nerd. I like to, kind of break it down via science. How much did science and using science kind of play into SGA's development to become this type of player?
I think it did a decent amount, especially when he was younger. I mean, you look at guys who have this sort of unique pace that they play with, and it's very rare that someone develops that later in life. You know, when I covered Jalen Brunson for a number of years, and he's a guy who I compare to SGA, not because of anything in terms of like, this guy is equal to this guy, but more just because Brunson plays in a way and at a pace and changes speeds in a fashion that nobody else in the league does. He just stylistically is different from everybody else. And I feel the same way about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I feel the same way about Nikola Jokic. Just plays at a pace and a speed and with a style that nobody else aesthetically matches, especially not at that level of contributions that those guys give. And normally when you have a player like that, it's not like they're just this normal cookie cutter sort of style until they're 22 years old. And then all of a sudden they develop something different. It's something innate. It's something that happens, whether because of nature or nurture. It's something that happens throughout their developmental years. And so I wanted to find out during this story, okay, how did Shai develop this? And I find that a lot of the reasons for why some of these elite players have quirks in their games, it's to compensate for something. Sometimes for lack of athleticism, for lack of speed, for lack of jumping ability, for lack of size.
Right.
Shai's pretty fast. Shai's pretty athletic. Shai's a really tall point guard. He's pretty long. I'm like, where did this come from? How did this come to be? And part of it, which I didn't know going into the story, is that he wasn't always so big. He had a late growth spurt. He was 5'6", 5'7", when he was 13 years old, and he was in 8th grade, and he started working with the coach you just mentioned, Dwayne Washington, who was his club coach. And Dwayne Washington was also a science teacher at the first high school that Shai ended up going to. He never actually had him in science class. I asked that. I wanted to know what Shai got, what grade Shai got in his class, because I thought that would be a great detail for the story. And he didn't have him in the class. And I was like, damn, that really kills the narrative. You can go back to high school, take his class, and see what you get just to get it.
Did you petition for the records just to find out?
Yeah, exactly. But so Dwayne Washington, when he coached him, was like, I'm going to blend the two things I know best in teaching. And for what it's worth, you look at some of the other guys who he's worked with, because Shai is not the only NBA player who he's worked with. And I didn't include this in the story because I thought it kind of led me on a path to a place that like made the story too long and kind of not as focused. But you look at Andrew Nembhard. Andrew Nembhard's ability to stop on a dime. All these guys are elite at changing speeds and stopping. Andrew Nembhard, not as good of a player as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but he's good. He's very good. And he is elite at playing with speeds. And he taught Shai how to play with speeds, how to compensate for that lack of size by messing with timing. He taught him about acceleration and deceleration. He used the analogy of Shai being a car that has 4 gears. And he came up with a formula that Shai could use at the time. You don't ever want to go to 4th gear because then you're going to lose control of the wheel. You don't really want to vacillate between 2nd and 3rd gear because that's too predictable. They're too similar. So you want to go from 3 to 1, 1 to 3, ratchet back down to 2, and then 2 to 1, and then 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. And that's the way that you can just kind of mess with people's timing. So Shai started working on shifting between those gears. And he taught him about the strength of triangles, which is not really, I mean, look, if I'm going to have a criticism of this story, if I'm a reader and I'm non-biased, I said science. And I mentioned it as geometry. But geometry is not science; it's math. It's math. It's not science. So I really could have said science.
Well,
and
hold on. Now there's
math.
a little bit of physics in there. I mean, changing speeds, acceleration, deceleration.
Right, yeah.
I mean, when you think about
that is for
sports,
sure.
Right.
The strength of triangles, though, we're really just talking.
That's
geometry.
Yeah. But if you think about it, a point guard like a pitcher, it makes a lot of sense. You want to have off-speed stuff that complements your fastball, and you want to have a curveball. And I mean, I would argue Shai added a curveball this year with the step back, right? Being able to get into that step back from both directions and to hit it at the rate that he has. I mean, the best players in the league have been able to do all these things. I mean, you didn't mention him, but Luka Doncic is another guy that does the same thing. And I would argue to an even higher level when you consider how slow he goes sometimes to speed guys up. So with Shai, like the way that he scores, okay, 3-level, especially now, the step back. I mean, what can he add? Like you mentioned how he got to where he's at. How can he improve? Because I feel like he's still got stuff he can tap into.
So first of all, I just want to say, I'm so happy you made a baseball reference. I never go on a basketball podcast and fail to be the first one to make the baseball reference. So I'm so happy that you did it for me.
Welcome to the NBA Daily.
That's right. Yeah.
You know what's funny? You know how I got that anecdote about pacing? I was like trying to figure out that pacing and how they got there. And you know how I got that out of like Dwayne Washington? I got him to open up on it. Was I made an analogy and I was like, tell me if you agree or disagree. I was like, I feel like most elite NBA point guards are more like Randy Johnson, where they're just going to blow you away, 97 mile an hour fastball, giant size.
First step.
Giant size, 97 mile an hour fastball, mix in just a power slider. Like that's how most NBA star point guards play. Shai is like Greg Maddux. And where he's 91, 92 on the fastball, but he's just going to paint corners. And everything is precision, accuracy, and intelligence. And I made that analogy, and he wasn't a baseball fan, so it didn't work. But then I explained the analogy to him, and he was like, oh, yes, 100%.
Funny enough,
and it got him to open up.
I would say Shai is a little bit like late career Roger Clemens when he had that really nice curveball. Greg Maddux, maybe more Steph Curry to me, right? Like,
guys are getting way too baseball-y here now. Listen.
Well, Fred is loving it. I mean, you turn a basketball podcast into a baseball podcast and he's all in.
Yeah. That's all I want.
So how does he get better?
That's all I want.
What's the next thing? What's the next thing he's got to add to his game?
Well, honestly, I think he needs to use a sweeper. I really think he needs to add that. Old school pitchers just have the curveball and the slider. He needs the sweeper. Maybe he could sneak in a spitball if he can get it by the umpires. What can he do to get better? You look at his shot breakdown, and what's really interesting, he takes about 20 shots a game, and he's about 5 in the restricted area, 5 in the paint non-restricted area, 5 mid-range, and 5 threes. That's approximately the breakdown. So when you really talk about, and I'm a big believer that we should talk about 4-level scorers, not 3-level scorers, because there's a difference between the long 2 and the short mid-range.
There's
a huge difference. Kevin Durant is a master of the short and the long mid-range. There are guys who are unbelievable in the short mid-range, bad in the long mid-range. You don't want them taking them. A 12-footer is not the same thing as a 19-footer. It's just not the same thing. And to me, Shai is a 4-level scorer right now. To me, the place where he can get better is maybe as a passer. He's already really good at knowing the first read. He's really difficult to blitz. I actually wrote something last week about how many guard-to-guard screens the Thunder set and how he's really good at just getting off the ball when he gets blitzed. And the Thunder have creators who are receiving the ball in those scenarios because it's Alex Caruso or it's Lou Dort or it's J-Dub or it's Casey Wallace or it's Wiggins. It's like guys who are comfortable handling the ball, or even Isaiah Hartenstein, who are comfortable handling the ball in those scenarios, who can then make plays. And Shai is really good at getting off the ball, making the intuitive pass. In terms of passing guys open, in terms of getting all the way to the hoop and then creating cross-court passes from there, I think that's something that maybe he could get a little bit better at. I also think really more of the improvement comes on the other side because he's such an incredibly complete offensive player, where he is very good in passing lanes. Mm-hmm. He is a legitimately good defender, but on the ball, he can get bullied. And look, I mean, everyone's got something.
Everybody's, exactly. Everybody. And you know what? I think like one of the interesting things when you look at OKC for the rest of this season is like, how are they going to mask some of that? And, you could point to a million stats for OKC this season on why they will win the championship. We went through it a couple days ago where I listed like 15 historical stats on why this team probably ends up winning the championship. How do you look at how great they've been in the regular season, how great Shai has been in the regular season, and translate that to playoff success? Do you think they're the team to beat here as we head into the final stretch? And I guess, are they going to be winning the championship in June?
I think there's no question they're the team to beat in the West. I mean, they're 11 games better than anybody else. They have by far the best defense in the league. They are able to play the greatest amount of varieties now that they have Chet Holmgren back. They can go really, really big with that double big lineup they're using with Chet and with Hartenstein. And they can throw Dort out there, and they can throw J-Dub out there, and they can throw Shai out there. And that is just a massive lineup. They can go small and they can go 5 out with Chet. They can have a playmaker in the middle, but still have size with Hartenstein. They have a gazillion wings and switchable defenders who come off the bench. Alex Caruso is the best defensive player on just about every single team in the league. And it's just like, where does he even rank? Yeah. Like, you could have arguments about where he ranks. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if he were on a average team, might be your second best defender. He might be. I think there's an argument he's their 7th or 8th when you go through it and you talk about just pure impact. I mean, Chet and Hartenstein are the guys who protect the rim, and they're there. Dort is going to make his first all-defense team this year, and it'll be well-deserved when he does. Caruso is a perennial all-defense guy and would be in that conversation if he hadn't missed too many games this year. Casey Wallace is one of the most underrated defenders in the league and is fabulous. Aaron Wiggins is a really good defensive player. And I feel like I might even be forgetting about somebody else too, who's J-Dub. J-Dub is going to be in the conversation.
Rim protection was excellent.
J-Dub is one of the most versatile defenders in the league. I mean, he legitimately, like, they start him on 1 through 5. He's kind of the guy who unlocks everything they do defensively because they're able to put their centers on non-shooters and have J-Dub guard the other team's center because they trust him so much because he's so physical defensively. And he'll be like, I don't know if he'll make all defense, but he's going to get votes, and they will be deserved votes. He is a legitimate candidate to put on an all defense ballot. So by the time you get to it, we're talking about Shai is like the 8th or 9th best defender on that team. I think they're in really good shape in that sense. They are the team to beat in the Western Conference, in my mind, without question. Offensively, they're already up into the top 5 now in points per possession. Yeah, I get it. The people get a little bit concerned about them not having a ton of creation and J-Dub not having as great of a year as a creator. I'll tell you what, like,
they might be able to do it regardless.
I mean, they've done what they've done so far. They're obviously an elite team. They've checked every single regular season box that you can check for a team that has not only made the finals, but won the finals. I think at this point, it's just, they got to do it. That's it. We just got to watch them go through it. So
here's the other part of it too. In the playoffs, where a lot of refs let a lot more stuff go. And that's not just a cliche. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thunder defense might be better. What's their biggest flaw as a defense right now? They foul too much.
They foul too much.
They foul too much.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to foul as much. What's their biggest flaws in offense right now, even though they're top 5 in offense?
Secondary.
They don't get to the line as much.
Yeah.
They have by far the largest free throw disparity in the league in the wrong direction. By far. They give up way more free throws than they get. Well, there's a decent chance that in the playoffs, that gap, while it still may exist, it's going to be smaller.
It'll shrink. Yeah.
As the number
Chris
of
Finch,
free throws
to check those numbers, because Chris Finch feels so different.
Exactly.
Yeah, that caught me so off guard because
really
Thunder are like 28th in free throw attempts. Like
Shai's reputation for
It's Shai's
being
reputation,
a free throw merchant has permeated.
It's also
the
not
NBA.
even. There's no context behind that. Every player who drives as much as he does gets to the foul line. It's
He literally has 200 more drives this season than any other player in the league.
Absurd.
Yeah.
He has like 1,200 drives this season.
Yeah.
Second in the league is like 1,000. He literally drives to the hoop more than anybody else in the league. Of course he gets to the line. Like, of course he gets someone's got to lead the league in free throws. Someone's got to get free throws.
Exactly.
Someone has to do it.
All right, Fred, before we get out of here, are they going to win the title?
Sure. Why not?
There you go. That's a tough prediction to make because the field obviously has a better chance. Guys,
the field has a better chance.
Go read Fred's piece on Shai over at The Athletic. Go read Fred all the time. Fred, I tell you this all the time. You're the best. You need a weekly column so that we can get these Fred opinions out in long form. I'm waiting on that. Hopefully, by the time next season comes around, we'll get that.
I got my notebook. People can check out.
Column. I need
Comes
the
out in
opinions of
nuggets.
Fred Katz. Thank you, Fred Katz, for hanging out with us. Thank you, Es Baraheni, for hanging out with me every day, guys. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you for listening. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for waking up with us.